All right. So hopefully you're at Ruth, which is in the Old Testament, and you're wondering, okay, why are you choosing these first few verses of this book? Well, in the afternoon service, starting today, we're actually going to be going through Ruth. We're going to do a short series going through the book of Ruth. One reason is that it's different than what we're used to on a normal Sunday morning. Most of the time, when you hear a preacher, he's going through the New Testament, there's nothing wrong with that because it's in the Bible. But then there's also the Old Testament, which is actually 2/3 of the whole Bible. And going through an Old Testament story or a narrative is not a usual thing. So that's one reason why I chose this. And another reason is when we read through the book of Ruth, the main protagonists are actually female, which is different than what our normal conception is of the Bible and who the main characters are. So we have female characters that are heavily involved in this story. And then as we look through the book of Ruth, as you read through it, or if you've read it before, you see that God is sovereignly at work in the seemingly ordinary circumstances of life. And He's moving things for greater purposes and greater plans, especially through the Israelites in the Old Testament. And that should be a comfort to us as well. So in the afternoon service, we're starting with Ruth, and then we're going to continue on. So I guess I'll just start with you guys here, and then I'll be preaching again later this afternoon. And then the next time I come to preach, which is I think the end of November, then we're actually going to be finishing Ruth. So I'm giving you the front and the end. All right. In the middle, you can ask for a recording or something. All right. And so through this, hopefully, if you've never read it, I would encourage you to read through Ruth. It's a great story. It's pretty short. That you can see that God is amazingly faithful in pointing us to Him and pointing us to Christ. So that's my intro with that. Now, here's a question for all of us, and maybe this might pertain to you. Anyone ever moved to a different state or a country before? Okay. Oh, it's a good number of us. Okay, so I'm not the only one. Now, why do we make such a move, if we do move? Okay, unless you got money like no other, you're not just moving for the heck of it. Like, well, I just want a new setting, so I'm just going to move and choo-choo-choo-choo. No, we usually don't do that. We usually move for various reasons, which include job, school, to be with certain family members, or to avoid trouble at the current location that we're in. We're just trying to get away. Some of us do that. Or others of us, we just move somewhere because we're looking for a new start in life. We just need to hit the reset button, and we need something new. And sometimes these moves are permanent, and they're for a long time, while other times the move is temporary due to the circumstances, such as if you go somewhere for school and you graduate and you move back. And if you've done such a transition or a move in your life, that's a huge experience, correct? You can probably remember right now what you were thinking and what you were feeling. And I don't know about you, there are probably some uncertainties that you were thinking about when you were making such a move. And if you're honest, and I'm honest, at times we wonder if we really want to trust in God. And I'll just use myself as an example. So we're in 2017, about 3.5 years ago. 4.5 years ago. Because I'm a lifelong Texan. All right, Texas is awesome, right, Jack? Okay. Although people probably don't like Texas right now because of baseball, because they want the Dodgers to beat the Astros. Anyway, so I call myself a Korean Texan. That's just how much I like my state. And yet, 4.5 years ago, I decided to move from Texas to the East Coast, to the D.C. area, to Maryland. And now, if you've made such a move, you understand there's a lot of logistical pain involved, right? With just bills and driver's license and car and registration. And I had to what's a admissions test? We don't do that in Texas. And I don't understand that. And being from Texas and going to the East Coast, I had some little culture shock. Okay, these East Coast people, how do I engage with them? I heard they're mean, so I got to be careful. It's the stereotype. And they're kind of being nice to me. Although when I started driving, people were just honking their horn at me, like, dude, you're like 3 cars behind me. Why are you getting mad at me? And all that stuff. And the weather's different there because they actually have 4 seasons, and the winter is actually a winter. In the summer, you feel like you're in a sauna because it's super humid. And then the food is different because someone told me over there that good tacos are found at Taco Bell. And I'm thinking, that's not the case. I'm from Texas. You cannot find Taco Bell. It's just cheap because it's not actual tacos. If you work at Taco Bell, no offense. So my experience in moving there has shaped me to who I am. And even as I moved here, I had a huge transition from the East Coast to West Coast. And being here now, I would have to say that West Coast is better than East Coast, correct? West Coast, best coast, right? All right, and this is going to be on video, and now I'm going to get in trouble from East Coast friends. But Texas is still the best. Okay, you and I are here together today because each of us have made certain decisions, correct? We've made certain decisions about where to live for school and work and family and all that stuff. Which means, well, each of us here, we have been on a journey or related where we've been on a sojourn in our life. And you know what the interesting thing is for all of us? If you haven't thought of it before, is that your life journey has been sovereignly overseen by God, even if it didn't seem that way. That He has been with you. That, yes, you made your decisions to go to this place for school or go to this place for work, and yet He's always been there the whole time. He has been. So as we go through these first 5 verses of Ruth, we're going to see a family journey from their home and see what the results are from their journey. All right? So let's look at verse 1 here. Just the first phrase. It says what? In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So when we journey across any story, when we start off reading it, we got to understand some basic context and setting so that we can get a more complete picture as to what's going on. Because history does not happen in a vacuum. Here's a weird example. So in 2 months, there's an important movie that's coming out. Anyone want to take a guess? Star Wars, yes. Right answer. Star Wars. Okay, that's the right answer. Star Wars is coming episode 8, The Last Jedi, and I like Star Wars, so I can't wait. Now, you cannot watch this movie, episode 8, if you have not even watched episode 7, correct? That doesn't make any sense. And I would even say, if you have not even watched episodes 4, 5, and 6, you can't watch episode 7, and you can't watch, if you just dive in to watch episode 8, and you've never watched the previous movies, and you don't really have to watch episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then you're wondering, I don't know what's going on. And then you would be right, because you have no context as to what is happening in this story. You have to understand the timeline to get a better idea of what is happening in the action and to experience it in the movie as opposed to being just some passive observer. So when we see here, it says, in the days when the judges were, what's going on here? Well, if you have a paper Bible open and you flip one page over, okay, the very last verse in Judges, the book of Judges, chapter 21, verse 25 says this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, what a weird way to end a Bible book, right? Now, but really, that verse is a summary of the whole book of Judges and how wacky and crazy that time period was. Because everyone doing right in their own eyes led to, if you read through the book of Judges, you see some really not so PG stuff, such as a dude murders all his brothers. A guy sacrifices his daughter, like literally sacrifices his daughter. So child sacrifice. We see gang rape. We see genocide, and we see basically a disintegration of society happening that leads to chaos, confusion, because people are just trying to do what is right in their own eyes. And if you flip over to Judges chapter 2, I think it should be on the screen. Chapter 2, verses 11 through 19. It's kind of long, but just for context's sake, I need to read this. This is what's going on here. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress. Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So God's people doing what was right in their own eyes was what? Evil in God's sight. And false worship came about, and God decided to dole out some justice on his people. Now, you and I, in the 21st century in Southern California, we are so much smarter and wiser and better than these ancient idiot folks, correct? Right? I mean, come on, we don't operate on the mentality of, I'm going to do whatever's right in my eyes. Can I get an amen? No, I'm being sarcastic. Right? What's the truth? Our world today, I mean, you just turn on the news. It is broken and messed up just like this time period. It is wacky crazy. The cultural air that you and I currently breathe says what? Do whatever you think is right, live however you want, as long as you don't want. You don't hurt other people. Well, newsflash, that kind of view of living is super short-sighted and is naive to the propensity of human sin. It is. And if you and I don't think that's a problem, then all this stuff that we're hearing about a certain Hollywood producer that's being accused and all the stuff that's happened over the years, that this wouldn't come into light if we just live however we want. No. And this guy got fired and all this stuff. I mean, and even the Bible would say that's a stupid way to live. Proverbs 14:12 says what? There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Okay, straightforward. So we have a time period here as we read through Ruth where wrong is right and right is wrong, and everything is turned upside down, and there's a famine in the land. in the land. It says there was a famine in the land. Now, what's the significance of a famine being in the land? Well, we'll read some more verses in the Bible for context. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 13 through 17 says this, "And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil. And he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens, so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you." So the reality is that sin in our lives and in our world leads to some interesting consequences. Now you might be thinking, well, what about all this stuff that's going on with earthquakes and hurricanes, wildfires? If we cannot say that what's going on right now, all those hurricanes, is a direct result of someone's sin. We can't say that. That's a naive thing to say because we don't know. We ain't God. Now, on the other hand, though, we cannot say that this is just some natural weather phenomenon or climate change and all that stuff and then dismiss the supernatural. We can't do that either. All right, we can't do either extreme. Natural disasters are a result of us living in a Genesis 3 world, in a broken and fractured world. That's what's coming about. Not directly because of our individual sin, but just the totality of human sin, beginning with Adam and Eve. That's why we have natural disasters. And you have it right here. You have a famine. So what happens next after this famine starts happening? Well, let's look at verse 1 again. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." So reading this verse now, this whole verse 1 might make us wonder, okay, what's the big deal? Okay, this man is moving his family because there's a famine in the land. And like, that's not a big deal, right? Because when we see in our world today, especially with all the refugee stuff, that people actually move to get a better life, correct? That they move because there's war, there's disease, there's persecution, or something similar. And then all those refugees you hear about, they're not just going because they're going. They move because they want a better life. They want to protect their family. And who would not want to protect their family, correct? You're going to do whatever it takes. And you and I as Christians, as a side note, we should be all about helping those refugees. Amen? All right, hope you agree with me on that. All right, this family sojourned and journeyed as refugees fleeing a famine. They're leaving a dire situation because they're thinking, I got to feed my family or we're going to die. And that's not cool, so let's get out of here. And so we might think, okay, that's not a bad thing. I got to leave. But then let's examine here where they're leaving from and where they're going to. Because this family journeyed from Bethlehem, which is a city there. And this city, the name literally means house of bread. Now, when we read names in the Old Testament, a lot of times the meaning of those names has an underlying thing that kind of teases itself out in the story, in the verses. So if you really think about it, it's somewhat ironic that a family that's from a city called the House of Bread has no bread, and so they're trying to leave to find some other bread. Which means what? That this is not some ordinary famine, and this is not a super cool famine. It's not something that, it's like 1 or 2 days and we're done. No, this is something very drastic. And really, this famine is happening because the Israelites, who are God's people, they have not been trusting God in their life journey, in their life sojourn, and that's why they're having this famine. They, in a sense, have trusted themselves. They're trying to do whatever is right in their own eyes, and this has gotten them into trouble. And even with this knowledge that this family has, that this is the house of bread, as God's people, we need to trust God no matter what's happening. This is the promised land He has given to us. They decide to leave their house of bread and journey to the country of Moab, which was not a wise decision. Now, why is that? Well, if you read through the Bible, Israel, the country of Israel, had a very complicated relationship with the country of Moab. And Moab is modern-day Jordan. So if you read in Genesis 19, you see the start of Moab, the Moabites. And it started with an incestuous relationship between a father and a daughter, which is not very PG. It's very interesting. So you can read that in Genesis 19. And so that's how this people started. It's like, ooh, that's kind of weird. And then when the Israelites left Egypt to go into the promised land, the Moabites tried to stop them from going into the promise. They tried to curse them. They tried to seduce them. They tried to mess them up. And then during this time of the judges, one of the Moabite kings actually attacked part of Israel, subjugated it, conquered it, tried to beat up on the people. So with all that context in mind, these two countries were not like high-fiving each other. Hey buddy, how's it going? It's very complicated. A related example would be, for those of us who are of the Korean background, of the very complicated history and relationship between Korea and Japan, correct? That over the years, there's just been some interesting things, a lot of bad blood happening. And basically, this family, now going from Israel to Moab, would be like someone back in the day when Japan was controlling Korea. A Korean would leave Korea and go to Japan for a better life. Right? That person would probably looked like, what are you doing? Like, why are you going there? Those people don't like us. Now, if you were the family in this situation, right? You put yourself in this family's shoes, right? What would you do? Right, if we try to use our imagination here, right, would you say, okay, I'm going to trust in God, I'm trusting God, I don't know why this famine is terrible, we don't got any food, I'm going to stay here. Okay, we got to trust in God, God has promised us. Or might think, well, boy, that grass looks green on the other side. I think maybe let's just go there for a few years, even though we're not supposed to go there. Right, what would you do? What would I do, right? Maybe we might think we know what we do, but let's see in verse 2 some more details here. Verse 2 says what? The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. Now, the name Elimelech literally means, my God is king. That's what his name means. So you think, oh, that's a really cool sounding name, until we realize that our boy Elimelech is not doing a good thing by moving his wife and his sons to Moab. Because they've decided to do what? To leave the country where God is supposed to be king to a place that does not even believe that God is king. And rather than trusting in God as his king, he decides to flee, journey away from God, and journey away from the house of bread city that he's at, and journey to a different land to trust in someone or something else. He wants to trust what he sees with his physical circumstances. He's not really displaying much faith in God. And if we're honest, to try to dig into our own hearts, we really can't go after Elimelech and condemn it as being the dumbest of the dumb. Because truth of the matter is that you and I likely would make the same decision in similar circumstances. We probably would. Because why? Some of us, we move to a new place solely because it's a better job, right? With more pay, better benefits. Or we go to a school because of academic standing solely, right? And social prestige, without even considering the spiritual paradigm and context in the background of our decision. Okay? And maybe I'm offending a couple of you right now. We're not thinking about the spiritual payout. Or, because a good number of us are parents here, some of us make decisions to move somewhere based solely on what? Because of our kids. Right? We want the best education for them. We want the best stuff for them, which isn't wrong per se, but then we start neglecting the spiritual provision that we have to provide for them as parents to disciple and to raise them up in the Lord. Because the American dream cannot fulfill what it promises. It cannot. And if I choose a place solely because of some outside thing, the standards that only the world says, without even thinking about the spiritual undertones, I am not going to do a good service to myself. So, and then other people, right? Let's just drill it even more. Sometimes, maybe you've seen it before, that someone ends up liking somebody else, or they want to like someone. So then they journey away from their family and their friends who are trying to give them good counsel, and they just want to be with the one, because that person makes me feel good without even thinking about the spiritual context involved. That unicorn doesn't exist, the one for you in this world. All right, you and I make decisions in our lives based a lot of times on what we see in our physical circumstances that does not, at times, if we're not careful, display that we actually trust in God. Okay? We're all guilty of that. Now, this family journeys away from the promises of God that's been given to them. And they're trusting in a new land where they don't know the language, they don't know the culture, these people don't even believe in God, and they've sojourned over there thinking that this place will meet my needs. But unfortunately, this plan doesn't go as hoped. Let's look at verse 3. Verse 3 says what? But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Now, we don't know the circumstances of why he died and the cause of his death, but there's one thing we probably do know, is that this is utterly devastating. All right, think about it. You move to a new place. You're trying to settle in. You're in the search of a better life when you shouldn't have left at all. And when you move somewhere, you don't know this place. All you know is what? Your family. That's the only people that you know. You don't know anyone else. And the guy who initiated this journey, started this whole thing and this whole process, all of a sudden passes away. That's horrible. Correct? And that's just not fun. And really, the dream of a better life is basically tragically crushed, and whatever benefits that might have existed have completely vanished. And the truth is, that can happen to any one of us here. Because all it takes right now, we're in here right now, all it could take is you get that phone call, you get that text, which would smash us to the floor. It can happen to any one of us. It doesn't matter how rich or poor, how beautiful, not as pretty, or whatever. Okay, where you're from. And I don't know about you, if that happened to me, if I got a text that something happened to one of my parents or a sibling or someone that I loved and cared, you would have to peel me off the ground and then mop the floor of all my tears because just the utter hurt of a loved one being snatched away. That can happen to any one of us without exception. And then this horrible part is that those of us who are left behind we have to gather together the broken pieces and try to cobble it back together, correct? And then deal with life as that way. And that's not really fun. That's what's happening here. So you can imagine that Naomi, right? Okay, the father, the leader of the family is gone. So she's probably confused. Her and her son's like, hey, what's going on here? All right? What's going to happen to us? And rather than decide, okay, maybe we should just go back home because the father and husband's not around, they actually the sons decide to trust in other people and not in God. All right, look at verse 4. Verse 4 says this. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. Now here's a quick tangent. Okay, the name Orpah is actually the birth name of Oprah Winfrey, if you didn't know that. And her name, she calls herself Oprah because they couldn't pronounce Orpah. Okay, the fun fact. Okay, it's in the Bible that she has a Bible name. All right, that's my tangent. Now here's the thing. We might think in our modern society that, okay, what's the big deal about these two guys taking wives that are of different ethnicity and a race? Because in our more enlightened society, there's no big deal about interracial marriages, correct? All right, there's no big, if you say there's a big deal with that, we got to talk later. All right, and you'd be right. There is no problem with interracial marriages or marrying someone of a different ethnic background. Really, but the problem here with them marrying Moabite women is that these ladies did not have the same spiritual background as these men, which means they worshipped other gods. They didn't worship the one true God. And I'm going to say this, and this might be controversial, so hopefully you might fire off a nasty message to me, but it's okay. I got to say this. If you, as a Christian, decide to marry someone who is not a Christian, basically that person doesn't trust in God, it is a sin. And you will reap consequences that will take years to unravel. I'm going to say it again. If you claim to be a Christian, and if you decide to marry someone who does not claim to be a Christian, you are going to sin. That is a sin, and you will reap consequences that it will take years to unravel. All right? I probably have offended someone right now. But if you think I'm being harsh and judgmental in saying that, let's see what the Bible has to say. Deuteronomy 7:3-4 says this. You shall not intermarry with them. Who's them? Other peoples. Giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. Why? For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. So I'm just trying to be the messenger here for your own sake. And the sad part is Naomi and her sons do not follow through on God's standards for their life journey. They have moved away and they've decided to stay there. The sons decided to marry a woman they probably shouldn't have married. And then it says here at the end of verse 4 that they lived there 10 years. And then if we go to verse 5, our story takes one final turn. Right? Verse 5 says what? And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her sons and her husband. Now imagine with me, right, looking at Naomi. Picture her in your mind. With uncertainty, she what? She trusted her husband initially to lead them on this journey to a new land. And then he dies. So then she places her trust in her sons, as these are now the men in her life. Then they die. So you can maybe, if we try to imagine here, if we watch her, she's standing probably over the third grave, and it's one of her sons. And she's utterly devastated. I mean, all the men in her life are gone. I mean, her journey has now become a nightmare. It is terrible. And instead of like weeping and crying and just snot and all that, she might be so emotionally exhausted that she can't show anything. She just might be all tired and tortured and worn out and sad in her face. It might be that case. Right? She is a widow with no living descendants no possibility of future descendants. So we might be wondering, can she even recover from this situation? And if we place ourselves in her shoes, we might, and she might have even been thinking that God is cruel. Right? God doesn't care about me. He is evil. Why? Because my husband's taken away. And the pain is even worse, right? For a parent to see their children go before them, to go to the grave before them, that, from what I've heard, that is one of the worst things ever. For a parent to see their child go before them. And so for her, for Naomi, right, basically she's probably thinking, God has plunged a sword into my heart, and he's twisted it, right? And he's taken my husband away from me, and then he's thrust it even further, and he's twisted it even more, and he's taken my 2 sons away from me. And if I don't know about you, probably, if not in your mind, but if not out loud, but maybe in your mind, you might be thinking, I might be thinking, why, God? Why is this happening to me? I've trusted these men, and you have taken them away. Why? And we want to demand an explanation, and if we read these verses, there is no explanation. Right? And that sucks. And yet, what? Through all these sad verses we've just read, right? This is not a very chipper sermon, right? What truth is there to learn here? And I would say it's this. Life is a journey, a sojourn in trusting God. Okay, I'll say it again. Life is a journey, a sojourn in trusting God. Okay? Life is a journey, a sojourn in trusting God. You continue reading through Ruth, you see how faithful and loving God is to Naomi. And then we'll see Ruth, that he is faithful, that his grace sustains everything. And even though Naomi right here, she's at the bottom of the bottoms, you continue reading, you'll see that God has not abandoned her, that he loves her and he's going to redeem her life. Let me end our time like this. You and I, all of us, no matter how young, how old we are, you and I, all of us are on a journey of life. You have made decisions in the past that have affected your present today. You and I will be making decisions today that will affect our future. And for some of us here, because I don't know everyone here, our journeys probably might have experienced a lot of pain because of a lack of us trusting God. That maybe we've made decisions in our marriages, or our family life, or our work life, or school life, or maybe some other things that have negatively affected us, and we have reaped those consequences upon ourselves. Right? Maybe that's some of us here. Right? And probably on some level we know that. But then there's others of us here that we've been trying to faithfully follow after God, trusting, okay, God, I'm going to journey with you, I'm going to sojourn with you. And yet, things have happened in their lives that are out of our control, that it's just so beat us up and crush us, correct? Maybe if I'm a parent here, like something happens to one of my kids, and I'm like thinking, why? I've been trying to follow you, God, but why is my kid? Or I'm trying to follow you, God, and I don't have a job anymore. Or like I'm having issues at work. Or I'm having issues at school. Why? Right? I'm trying to journey and sojourn with you. Do you not trust in me? Do you not care about me? And I'm trying my best, God. Maybe that's some of us here. All right. And the longer we live through life, we experience these various things probably. You know what the beauty of the gospel is, of the Christian life? Is that Jesus, he himself made a journey. Right? He made a sojourn for us. If you really think about it, okay, he was in a land of plenty in heaven. And yet, he decided to step into a land of spiritual famine. Us. He went to a foreign land of sin and death, even though that's not his homeland. His home is in heaven. He decided to come here. And then he decided to be amongst us, to intermingle with us. And then the crazy thing is, not only that, as he's trying, I'm going to journey with you, he then decides, I'm going to go to the cross. I'm going to marry myself with you. Even though you are foreign to me, I'm going to marry myself to you. And all the times that you have not trusted in me, all the times that you have not journeyed with me, all the times you've not tried to follow me, all the times that other people have done stuff to you to kind of put you off track, I'm going to take all of that. Right? I know I'm going to feel your pain. I'm going to take that upon myself. And then through faith in me, he says, well, I'm going to transform your life so that you had a new life journey. Right? I'm going to redeem your marriages. I have the ability to do. I can redeem your workplace life, your relationship with your kids, a whole host of things. Will you trust in me? That's what the gospel is. Jesus to us. So if you are a believer here, right, and you might be dealing with something right now, please don't give up. Right? God is with you. Amen? Amen. All right? Continue to trust and journey with him. He's already journeying with you. He wants you to go with him. Okay, if you're not a believer here, this opportunity to journey can start today. Right? He can be with you. The question is, will you trust in him fully to go with him? For all of us, no matter Christian or non-Christian, there is no sin, there is no circumstance that is beyond or greater or more powerful than the cross of Christ. Okay? Maybe one or two of us here, we're dealing with something right now, and we are at our wits' end. And we're just inside, we're crying. We're hurting. And God says, I know your pain. Look to the cross. Follow, trust in me. That's for all of us. Let me end by reading this quote here from a pastor in the UK. He says this: like those in this story, we are just ordinary folk, unable to see how the events of our lives will turn out. But by understanding God's wonderful sovereign purposes at work in the story of Ruth, we too can trust God and rejoice that our poverty will be turned to plenty by discovering the riches that are ours through Jesus Christ. So brothers and sisters, life is a journey. So let's sojourn together. Let's travel together and trust in God. Amen? All right, let's pray.